Okay. Whew. Wow, we thought we were so happy to get out of 2020, huh? Whoa, we get into 2021 and surprise! So first of all, what I want to say is that please don't think that if you have experienced anger or frustration or outrage or have been appalled or dismayed or saddened by the events of this past week, that you're any less of a spiritual being. I am always one to say that we are spiritual beings. That is our true nature, but we're having a very human experience. And it's okay that you have felt some of these things. What we witnessed this week, it obviously, I realized in the moment that it was happening. In fact, Paul and I sat and watched the entire thing because we were like, this is going to go down in history. Not so much as a positive thing, but, you know, it's going to go down in history. And I think that I'm probably safe in saying that the majority of us were pretty appalled by the events of and actions of these extremists. And that's what I want to say here. This is not a partisan issue. They do not represent the Republican Party. These are extremists that were acting out in our capital this week. So in her book, Untamed by Glennon Doyle, I'm going to share more of her stuff next week, but she says destruction is essential to construction. If we want to build the new, we must be willing to let the old burn. So I want to share with you a little bit of my thought process here, just as an offering. So as we can look throughout history, what we can see is that we are constantly changing, evolving, we're progressing, we're growing, because that is our nature to do so. And just as we know that the universe is expanding, that means that everything else within the universe is also growing and expanding. But how I see this is that there are this group of extremists that want the old order of the white, straight, mostly rich male to be in power. And what they're acting out of, my friends, is out of fear. They're acting out of fear for what they feel is changing. And we all have a tendency to act out of fear, don't we, when things are changing and not in the way that we would like them to change. But we have been evolving as humankind, and we have been learning to value each and every person on the face of the planet, regardless of gender identity, of lifestyle, of socioeconomic status, of race, and on and on and on, as every single one of us being important and valuable and really working towards that place of equality for everyone. I believe that what is happening right now is that the new is emerging and has been emerging for a while, and that in that old way, again, of doing America, it's freaking out and rising up and saying no. Now in Unity, we call this chemicalization. So let's look at what our co-founder, Charles Fillmore, says about chemicalization. He says chemicalization is a condition in the mind that is brought about by the conflict that takes place when a high spiritual realization contacts an old error state of consciousness. Whenever a new spiritual idea is introduced into the mind, some negative belief is disturbed. It resists. With this resistance comes more or less a commotion in the consciousness. And what we're seeing is that there's this resistance and there's this commotion in the collective consciousness. Here's the thing. The evolution of humankind cannot be stopped. It's been tried to be stopped. That's probably not the right way to say that, but over and over again throughout history. But what we see is that, you know, the evolution is going to continue. Our job is to continue to press forward. Now, what about divine order in all of this? Because sometimes it's hard to look at what's happening and say, well, all of this is in divine order. Well, for me, what I believe is that first, number one, we have been given free will. And so my every action, my every choice, my every decision is not necessarily the divine order of God. It can so easily be my ego. and that I'm going to make choices and decisions based on my ego. I think what happens a lot of times is that we act out of our ego, but what is always happening is that no matter what is occurring, there is this underlying divine order, underlying all of the chaos. Divine order is there. And I've always been a firm believer that the moment that anything occurs, that divine order is immediately working to bring it together for the greater good of everyone. But we must be active participants in bringing about that greater good. So, what I want to share with you this morning is I want to share with you a formula that when you use it will guide you through anything in your life, and that has the power to transform anything in your life. And what I'm going to share with you this morning, we're going to go back to basics, because I think it's always so important for us to go back to basics. Is I'm going to share with you the five, what I like to call the five guiding principles of unity. And when you apply these principles to your daily living, you'll be amazed that you'll find a peace that passes all understanding. When you apply these five principles to your dreams and desires, you'll be amazed at the seeming miraculous things that occur. And when you apply these five principles to the challenges of your life, to the challenges of life, you will find avenues opening up. You will find people stepping up. You will find these ideas coming to you that you would not have formerly imagined. Now, in Unity, we are not dogmatic in our beliefs. I am not here to tell you what to believe. I am simply here to remind us all what we already know at the core of our being. But as Charles Fillmore has always said, go to headquarters. You go, when I do headquarters here, I said head. This is headquarters, really. You go within and you allow the truth to be revealed to you and as you. So for the next week, like I said, for the next few weeks, we're going to be focusing on the basics. And I know that by really leaning in and focusing on our basics, that is going to help us to navigate these times in a better way for all of us. So here are our five basic principles, easy for us to remember, and feel free to speak them if you know them. They'll be up on the screen anyway. They are: God is, I am, I ask, I pray, and I act. Charles Fillmore says, the starting point in spiritual realization is a right understanding of that one designated as the Almighty. Our unity statement of God is: God is spirit, the loving source of all that is. God is the one power, all good, everywhere present, all wisdom. God is divine energy, continually creating, expressing, and sustaining all creation. In God, we live and move and have our being. In unity, some other ways we speak of God are life, light, love, substance, principle, law, and universal mind. And the late Reverend Eric Butterworth, great unity minister, said Jesus had a unique concept of God. To him, God was not an object of worship, but a presence dwelling in us, a force surrounding us, and a principle by which we live. So think just about that sentence: a presence dwelling in us, a force surrounding us, so both immanent and transcendent, but also principle by which we live, which is why these guiding principles are so powerful for us, because they teach us how we align with God as principle. It is not too much to say that anyone who catches the idea of Jesus' concept will find himself caught up in a new consciousness that will change his whole life, and he will never be the same again. How many of us can attest to that have been in? Yeah, we absolutely, absolutely. So, God, one presence, one power, all good. You know, we say this every week. And here's the thing: when we really get this, when we really allow ourselves to realize it, to embody this in our beingness, we can experience whatever comes to us in our life, whether it be great joy or great sadness, and know that God is in the midst of it, and that we can trust it no matter what, and that we will be guided as to what is ours to do next. God is for us. No one and nothing is against us. That's a big one, isn't it? But it's such an important concept, for us to really lean into and to embrace and to live from. God is for me. So no one and nothing out there is against me. And I'll have to do a whole nother talk on that sometime, because that's from Gary Simmons. So in Unity, we do not believe that we need an intermediary to connect us to God. No one can find God for us, because God is within us. To search outside of us, guess what? That puts us in contact with man. That puts us in contact with authority. But it doesn't necessarily put us in connection and in contact with God. Co-founder Charles Fillmore, again, he said, as Jesus realized and taught, and this is one of his things that he said all the time, the kingdom of God it's within me. The kingdom of God is right here, right now, at hand. And he said, spirit is the seat of power. Its abode is on the invisible side of man's nature. So today, what I'm going to focus on mainly is God is, but we're going to get some of the I am in this as well today. And I'm going to do this, and I had asked John if he would sing the song, The Greatest Thing. This is actually a song from our hymnal, one of my favorite songs, because this is really, the greatest thing in all my life is knowing you, is loving you, is serving you. This is, to me, it's a love song to the God of our understanding. So we're going to start with the greatest thing in all my life is knowing you. Oh, I just love that. So, of course, this is knowing the nature of God, but it's also about knowing the nature of God in relation to us, that, our relationship, the nature of ourselves. And why is this important that we dive into this, that we spend time with this? Here's what I'm going to tell you, and I know this from my own life, is that my understanding of God, my life flows out of that foundation. So when I was in that old understanding, where I was taught that God was a being outside of me, I had the concept of God as in the sky with the white robe and the long beard that was mean. This God was mean. I mean, you were not going to want to put yourself before this God, and that this God was an angry God, and this God was a jealous God. Well, my life experience for a long time was one in which I lived in fear of this God, and I did not feel worthy. I did not feel like I could ever truly live the life where I could be so perfect that I wouldn't go to hell. And that scared me. I mean, I truly thought for a period of time that I might go to hell, and I felt like I was a pretty good person, So getting clear on what we believe about the nature of God is so important. So again, we're going to kind of look at some of the words, some of the names we use for God. I know a lot of times when people first come into Unity, they've been so beaten down that they don't even want to call God God, and that's okay. You can call God whatever you want to call God. Universal consciousness, divine intelligence, divine mind, Holy Spirit, source, universe, the infinite, love, mother, father, principle. But I love Daniel Nahmod's song where he says, call it God, call it Spirit, call it Jesus, call it Lord. Call it Buddha, Baha'u'llah, angel's wings, or heaven's door. It's Mohammed, it's your mind, it's your soul, or it's your sign. It's the universe, it's music, Mother Earth, or Father Time. But whatever name you give it, it's all one power, can't you see? It's the power of the love in you and me. If you get a chance to go to YouTube and listen to Daniel Nahmod, N-A-H-M-O-D, One Power, it's incredibly beautiful. Now, Science of Mind, which is now Centers for Spiritual Living, I can see Ernest Holmes said there is a consciousness and a power in the universe that responds to us definitely, directly, and dynamically. Each individual must arrive at a place in his own consciousness where this contact is so immediate and so dynamic that if every other living soul denied it, he would still know. That's a good place to be, isn't it? When we can know, in spite of anything that's happening around us, that we can know that God is, and we can lean into that and we can trust it. That's a really good, solid place to be. What is the way to know God? Be still and know. Listen to the still, small voice. I'm telling you, we can read about God. You can listen to talks. You can listen to, have conversations with other people. But I'm going to tell you, your direct knowing of God will come through. Be still and know. Charles Fillmore, our co-founder, he ended up spending sometimes 4 to 6 hours a day in the silence because he was so determined that his experience of God was not going to be somebody else's, what somebody else told him, but he was going to have that direct experience of God so that he could say without any doubt what God was in his life. So what I want to share with you, because I think this is just a really practical experience that Glennon Doyle shares in her book Untamed. I'm going to read to you some of what she says about her experience with the be still and know. She says, I'd read that verse many times before, but it struck me freshly this time. It didn't say, poll your friends and know, or read books by experts and know, or scour the internet and know. It suggested a different approach to knowing. Just stop. Stop moving, stop talking, stop searching, stop panicking, stop flailing. If you just stop doing, you'll start knowing. This seemed like magical nonsense, but desperate women take desperate measures. I decided to experiment. After the kids left for school, I shut myself in my closet, sat down on a towel, closed my eyes, and did nothing but breathe. At first, each 10-minute session felt 10 hours long, and probably most of us can we can relate to this. I checked my phone every few minutes, planned my grocery lists, and mentally redecorated my living room. The only things I seemed to know on that floor were that I was hungry and itchy and suddenly desperate to fold laundry and to reorganize my pantry. I was an input junkie thrown into a box. Thrown into detox. I was tempted to quit every second, but I was stern with myself. 10 minutes a day is not too long to spend finding yourself, Glennon. For God's sake, you spend 80 minutes a day finding your keys. After a few weeks, like the gymnast who is able to stretch deeper after training, I began to feel myself dropping lower during each closet session. Eventually, I sank deep enough to find a new level inside me that I never knew existed. This place is underneath, low, deep, quiet, still. There are no voices, not even my own. All I can hear down there is my breath. It was as though I'd been drowning in my panic, and in my panic, I had been grasping for air, calling for rescue, and flailing on the surface. But what I really needed to do to save myself was let myself sink. It struck me that this is why people would say, calm down. Because underneath the noise of the pounding, swirling surf is a place where all is quiet and clear. Since the chaos stills in this deep, I could sense something that I was not able to sense on the surface. It was like that silent chamber in Denmark, one of the quietest places in the world, where people can actually feel and hear their own heartbeat, their own blood circulating. There in the deep, I could sense something circulating inside of me. It was a knowing. I can know things down at this level that I can't on the chaotic surface. Down here, when I pose a question about my life in words or abstract images, I sense a nudge. The nudge guides me toward the next precise thing, and then when I silently acknowledge the nudge, it fills me. The knowing feels like warm liquid gold, filling my veins and solidifying enough to make me feel steady and certain. What I learned, even though I'm afraid to say it, is that God lives in this deepness inside me. When I recognize God's presence and guidance, God celebrates by flooding me with warm liquid gold. Every day I returned to the closet, sat down on the floor littered with t-shirts and jeans, and I practiced sinking. The knowing would meet me in the deep and nudge me toward the next right thing, one thing at a time. And this is how I began to know what to do next. I think that is just such a real story about practicing the stillness. Because still, at this point, I still, will think about the laundry, or I'll, think about what I need to do next. It's very common when we're practicing the stillness for our mind to keep going, but it is in the practice of it that we finally find ourselves sinking beneath and touching something that we know is so special, is so beautiful, is so powerful. So when we look at this, and I think about this idea of the greatest thing in all my life is knowing you. I want to know you more. The greatest thing in all my life, I want to know your beauty. God, I want to know your goodness. I want to know and I want to feel your all-encompassing love. I want to know both your vastness and yet I want to feel your very presence within me. I want to know you as principal, but I also want to know you as personal to me. I want to know your mind. I want to know your intelligence. I want to know your infinite storehouse of potentiality and possibilities. And I want to know your grace. Because the greatest thing in all my life is knowing you. This, my friends, should be the most important thing that we do. The most important thing that feels like such an urgency that we can't not do it. Which leads us to the greatest thing in all my life is loving you. How do we love God? Jesus told us. He said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as you love yourself. He gave us the answer right there in that scripture. How do we love God? By loving ourselves and by loving our neighbors. How are we doing on that? This is a mighty call for us, isn't it? I mean, just think about loving ourselves. So in our humanness, it's hard to love ourselves. I mean, it just is. We see our faults. We see our failures. We judge unrighteously. We hold resentments. We gossip. We withhold love. We do all kinds of things, don't we, in our humanness that we know aren't of the highest order. Anybody else can admit to that? So it's easy for us to withhold that love from ourselves. Yet in reality, my friends, and I think this is always where Jesus was trying to take us. We are glorious and magnificent creations of God. The late Reverend Eric Butterworth said that we are an eachness in the allness of God. And I believe that Jesus really was trying to get us to focus on the godness of ourselves, of realizing and embodying the reality. And I love this saying, and I say it a lot, that I am not all that God is, but guess what? All that I am is God. That's my reality. When we leave this human body and leave the human mind, when we die, what's left? Our reality. That's the truth of us. And from that perspective, we learn to love our godness. I think about when Jesus went to the man who was lame by the pool of Bethesda, and he said, go and sin no more, pick up your mat and walk. And to me, what that is saying is that there is nothing in the realm of God, there's not a God that needs to forgive you, because God can only see your innocence. God as the creator, as divine mind, and again, I'm not talking about an anthropomorphic God, which is so hard to put any of this into words, but there's nothing that God would, this aspect of God could never withhold love because God is love. So there's nothing that you could ever do that would cause God to withhold love. Now, in our humanness, are there things people do that cause us to withhold our love? Ever? Yeah. But in the realm of God, there isn't that. So what he's saying here is, we must forgive ourselves. And we must learn to love ourselves from that greater reality. To recognize the incredible, magnificent spiritual beings that we are and that we were created to be. And in that, to learn to love and embrace even the fallible human being that we are. Because we are. It's okay. So let me ask you something. Well, first of all, let me say this. It's only truly when we love ourselves in that way that we can love our neighbor. Because it's only when we get there in ourselves and we're willing to see that innocence and that goodness and that purity in ourselves that we're able then to see that in other people around us. And I'll say that in these divisive times, that's not easy, is it? But let me ask you something. Because we disagree, do we have to be enemies? I'm hoping no. We don't have to be enemies. In fact, I always look at when something tragic happens, we all come together and none of that is there. We're just there with each other, loving each other. So no, we don't have to be enemies. Even in the midst of being appalled at the actions of people, especially lately, we can still pray for them. We can bless them, we can love them, and we can do good for them. Does that sound familiar as a scripture from our master teacher and great metaphysician? And this doesn't mean that we don't stand for our values. It doesn't mean that we become doormats. I mean, even Jesus, our master teacher, he got out there and he spoke against the government. And he did not care about what the Pharisees and the tax collectors were doing. And he overturned the tables. But you know what else he did? He had meals with people that he disagreed with. And I guarantee you that even when he walked away from a place, that he prayed for them. He absolutely prayed for them. And he did what he could do to love who they really were. So by loving ourselves, we learn to love the godness in others. And then the last thing is the greatest thing in all my life is serving you. So this is being the action of God. This is being in service to the greater good. How can I serve? How can I be a greater expression of God in the world around me? And it's getting outside of ourselves, which is not super easy right now in these COVID times, right? But I'm going to tell you, there's a lot of ways that we can do this. I love our good old Papa Harry would always say to me, this too shall pass. And this too shall pass, and there will be a point when we can get back together. But let us recognize that we're all going to express that service in different ways. And however that shows up for you, that's your way to serve. For some, it's going to be getting out into the community and helping the homeless or volunteering at food banks. For some, it's going to be standing on the corner and holding a sign in protest of something that goes against their values. For some, it's going to be creating connection with people, especially during this time with phone calls and cards. For some, it's going to be service through prayer, through holding that higher vision. For some, it's going to be giving of their treasures to nonprofits and that they value, and to helping the homeless, those in need. For some, it's going to be being a nurse or a teacher or any essential worker. For some, it's going to be taking care of animals. For some, it's going to be gardening or painting or making music or anything in a creative way. For some, it's going to be spreading hope and positivity. For some, it's going to be raising whole and healthy children, or being a great partner or a great neighbor or a great congregant or a great person out in the community. The point is that there are all kinds of ways that we can serve God, of being in service to God. Serving God is really doing our best just to be the presence of God. How can I be the presence of God in my life today? What a great question to start with. How can I best serve and be the presence of God in my life today? You know, my friends, we are finding ourselves in some very unusual times. And I'm going to tell you that I know for myself, I'm a work in progress. You know, I'm finding my way in this thing of standing up and speaking out for what I believe and standing in my values, while at the same time remembering that divine order is working and underlying all of the chaos, and that God, you know, love will transform, and then love will ultimately prevail. And none of us are doing this life perfectly, quote unquote. I'm on a Facebook group of Unity ministers, and it was interesting the other day, somebody posted a conspiracy theory on this group, and there was a lot of feedback about this conspiracy theory. And the person who posted it, for me, sadly said to everybody, "Whoa, you guys are really expressing your humanness." And I just wanted to say, welcome to life. Welcome to life. Because we are spiritual beings having a human experience. And experience, our humanness is just part of this journey. And this may not be a popular opinion, but I have to tell you that I have compassion for some of the people that got caught up in the whole mob mentality at the Capitol on Wednesday. You know, I've been heartened to hear some of them coming out and saying that they did get caught up in it, that, you know, they've apologized. Have felt that this was such a terrible mistake that they made, that they've apologized to their family, to their community, to their state, and ultimately to America. And you know, the reality is in our world, in America and in the world, we have laws, and so people will be held accountable for breaking the law. But really what I'm getting to is that we all make mistakes, and we all experience our humanness. And we must, my friends, we must learn ways to come together and to forgive, and ultimately to love. And you find that in you, and you be you. And I'm going to be me, and we're together, we're creating an incredible world. And, you know, for me, this one in particular, really getting to know the God of my understanding, to love God and to serve God, this is the most powerful way that we change the world for the better. So I'm going to just encourage you, your homework this week, if you would like to do it, is to do what Glennon Doyle did. Take 10 minutes a day and make that commitment to either physically go into the closet or go someplace where you just allow yourself to let the experience happen, but be committed to it. Because what you're going to find is ultimately, you're going to touch that. And you're not going to be able to explain it, because there's no words that can explain it. But it's the most beautiful experience when you touch the hem of the garment. And I say to you, namaste, namaste.